Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I am here with the co-hosts
Matt S's
of the Mattses.
Matt S's.
Yes. So we have the Matt Scott and the Matt Swartz, if it could not be any more confusing. But we're going to talk about something.
At least his last name is not a first name.
That's true.
He's the only one that's actually legitimate at this table.
Yeah. I didn't realize, our initials are exact.
What's your middle initial?
Oh, well, I've got a B.
Oh, I have a J.
Oh, okay. All right. So
J, Matt B.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
So we're talking about full-size trucks?
We are. So this is the full-size revolution.
Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about full-size trucks in the past, but Overland Journal is now publishing in our Gear Guide 2022, which is going to be coming out around the time that this podcast goes live, maybe a little bit before. We've got our full-size Overland Vehicle of the Year test, where we evaluated the Ram 2500, the Ram 2500 diesel. So Cummins, we have a Ram 2500 Power Wagon.
And they are drastically different trucks.
They are super different, which is the only reason why one manufacturer got two slots, is because they could not be more different, other than the fact that the doors look the same. That's about it. I mean, there's really not a lot about those vehicles that is similar. We also evaluated the Ford Tremor. We evaluated the Nissan XD. We evaluated the Toyota Tundra, the brand new 2022 Toyota
spanking new.
22 Toyota Tundra. We've got a broad spectrum of vehicles that we evaluated. There's a lot to say about each one of them, which is why we're going to take the time to make this a podcast.
And then there's the Ram TRX, which won. It's the best because I have it.
Yeah. We're going to take a brief break and we will be right back. This week's episode is supported in part by iCamper. They make innovative hard shell and soft-sided roof tents that are designed to survive long-term overland use. Their revolutionary X-Cover won the Overland Journal Editor's Choice Award, eliminating the bulky PVC cover and also allowing for the fitment of crossbars for carrying bikes and kayaks. Their SkyCamp Mini is another award-winning design that provides a hard shell tent in the footprint of a much smaller clamshell model. This is the perfect solution for smaller vehicles or on vehicles where rack space is dedicated to other systems. iCamper believes that the best times are those spent traveling, discovering the world with those you love most. You can find out more about their quality tents at iCamper.com. Matt has decided that the winner,
Is
even
the one
after
with the least payload, the worst gas mileage.
Yeah, exactly. And there literally some other vehicles we considered, like the TRX. We also considered the new Hummer EV pickup. There's a recently announced GMC AT4X that Matt was able to take a look at in person, which is a very compelling option. We were fairly mindful around payload, because if we can just all kind of think practically about a full-size truck, like why own a full-size truck if you're not gaining the benefit of payload, or in Matt's case, 700 horsepower?
I was just going to barge in and be like, power.
Yeah, exactly. So for the most part, if we're going to look at, and this is not true for everybody, and we're not trying to say that anyone listening should only buy a full-size if they need payload, but because there's other benefits like comfort and stability on the road and towing capability and all that. But for the most part, for the Overlander, the reason why we start to look 3/4 ton and 1 ton is because we want additional payload. If the manufacturer offered a 3/4 ton variant, then we featured it. So Nissan offers a regular Titan and a Titan XD. We featured the XD. You can buy a Ram 2500. You can buy a Ford 250. With the Toyota Tundra, you can only get the standard Tundra. So that's the reason why a half ton ended up in the mix. You would definitely not want to leave the Tundra out, I think. So
I think the Tundra's a great one.
They don't offer any other engine options.
There's
two engines.
Two engines. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. It's actually a very interesting decision point, because they have this new iForce, which is a 3.5 liter turbocharged engine. If you get it in an iForce, you get the 3.5 liter turbocharged engine, but then they bolt on this hybrid drivetrain, which includes an electric motor. So you go from high 300s horsepower to high 400s horsepower. You get within a very close, within 15 foot-pounds of torque of 600 foot-pounds. So you get like 583 foot-pounds of torque. So you end up...
That's 17.
Yeah, I don't do the maths.
I went to elementary school.
I don't even remember elementary school. So we all have our strengths.
I'm actually surprised I got that right.
Maybe after another PBR. Like, what happens to brain cells on PBR? That's what I want to know.
They perform much better.
No, they become more Midwestern, which is why we're drinking PBR when talking about full-size trucks.
Okay, I got it now. It all comes around full circle.
Yeah, corn-fed.
This is a This is the very first Overland Journal.
Podcast.
Yeah, corn-fed podcast.
I think it's actually rice.
Oh, it is?
That's Budweiser?
Oh, yeah.
Get out of here.
What?
Yeah.
Corn for PBR?
No, it's just like regular stuff for PBR. I think corn is natty ice. No, that's natural light. I remember when I drank too much in college, that was like the thing is like the beer of our fraternity it was natty light, natural light because it had corn in it. And I went to school in Peoria, Illinois.
Oh,
Maybe Gear 2023 needs a cheap beer.
okay.
Didn't I do something like that like 10 years ago for Expedition
You
Portal?
did. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. It was perfectly
I'm
timed.
still around.
It was perfectly timed.
I want to go dig that article up.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't worry, that was in the Joomla days.
Some of those
sense to no
some of
one.
those articles survived and some of them didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness.
So here's the thing with full size trucks for me. I've been lucky enough to own like
87 full-size trucks.
a wide spectrum of automobiles, purposes of editorial.
Editorial license you just took is what you took.
Anyways, so here's the deal. Take the 2500, 3500 Ram. It is like within 6 inches of dimensions of a Jeep Gladiator, except that it's available with like 1,075 pound-feet of torque when spec'd appropriately.
Mhm.
It has like an 8 squillion pound payload when
Yep.
spec'd appropriately. So unless you're talking, like really technical terrain, which let's be honest, like some Overlanders are doing that, but most travelers aren't. Like the capability of these trucks has just become so immense that, look at an AEV
Prospector.
Prospector XL, PXL, sorry. That's a truck on 40-inch tires that has ample suspension. Like it's great. Like it'll go
It's crazy capable.
pretty much anywhere you want it to go.
Yep.
And you have a commercial drivetrain, and then you have, all that payload and all that space that you can actually modify with.
And another thing we found too is that Detroit, let's call it North American manufacturers, they produce so many full-size trucks. They cannot get it wrong. They don't dare get it wrong.
A bad F-150 or a bad Super Duty is bad for America.
It is.
Like so many jobs are linked to the automotive space. We all kind of look after the 70 series Land Cruiser, some of these overseas utility vehicles. Well, we just get to drive something with more power, better suspension, air conditioned seats, and we get
more payload. Yeah.
more payload, and we get to pay like half as much.
Correct. You can buy a 2500 Ram Tradesman for around 50 grand. That's, if you want to talk about the bargain of the century, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
There's in the realm of the diesel trucks, that has one of the 6.7s. There's a 6.7 Power Stroke, which is Ford, and there's the 6.7 Cummins. For 2020, the 6.7 Cummins kind of got refreshed. It's a lot quieter. It's a lot nicer to drive. If you just sit next to a Gen 4 and what they will call like a Gen 4.5 or Gen 5, which is what's currently on the market, one is quiet and you can't hear it, and one is like clank, 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 clank.
Which I still kind of like. I don't know.
It's cool, but the interior quality, build quality, and engineering of the Rams really went up. Ford's kind of always been there. Ford's 6.7 Power Stroke. The main difference between those two engines, one's a straight 6, drives a little different. The Cummins drives more like a diesel. I feel like the 6.7 Power Stroke drives just really nice.
It does. And maybe we start with the Ford Tremor because it's such a groundbreaking product. We always had this Power Wagon that was this high watermark of capability, but it always, in a way, in maybe a very clear way, it was neutered by its payload. So you had this
its engine choice.
Correct. You had this very large vehicle, extremely capable, with a rich history. It had a 1,500 pound payload, and it was only available in the V8 gas. If you were in a place or you were the kind of buyer that wanted maximum capability out of a full size, it is no question the most capable choice. But it's unfortunate that it's never been available with a diesel. And the way that it's been described to me by the Ram engineers is it's very difficult to put a front locking differential with 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Like the size of the differentials have to be so massive to be able to take, imagine, because the typical consumer doesn't know this. So they go full lock to the left with a front lock differential and they're stuck in the mud. And next thing you know, you're blowing up U-joints like they're chiclets. So they really are limited in what they can do. Now, in my mind, it's always been, they make this excellent 3-liter turbo diesel, like find a way to put that 3-liter turbo diesel in with the Power Wagon and then give like an HD version or some, like call it the Overland or whatever, because they own the trademark.
That's kind of the rep.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe you're right. But to have a solid axle, front and rear, long travel, front and rear locked, small displacement turbo diesel, power wagon, to me would be the ultimate truck. But they don't make it. They don't make it. That's what makes the Ford Tremor so interesting.
And
is that
10 speed that's in the Tremor.
So good.
Just like
it's really good.
2500, the Ram side of things has the huge benefit of AEV.
Correct.
I'll be honest. If AEV made Ford stuff, it would be hard for me to get behind the Ram stuff. It's just that with Ram, you have such excellent aftermarket. You have a coil sprung rear end. Ford has always led with drivetrain,
or at least in recent years, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that the Cummins isn't great. I mean, it pulls like a freight train and it has that kind of diesel, like, what is it? It's like 1,025 pound-feet of torque in the standard.
1,045, if I remember correctly.
Okay. In the standard Tremor package.
But then you have, instead of a 6-speed, you have a 10-speed.
That is the only thing with the Ram that I just got rid of my 2021 Ram. It was a Laramie.
Yeah, Laramie 2500.
Yeah, it was the Laramie. Had the Cummins, had all the right stuff. Beautiful truck, really nice.
Really, really handsome truck.
Really nice, but it just felt a bit with that 6-speed transmission. It was fine. It was an old trans.
Yeah, once you go 10-speed, it's like
compared to Ford's 6-speed, which is in like my Earth Roamer, I forgot the name for it. The Ram trans is worse than that, and that was a 2011 trans. I think this started as a 5-speed and then got an extra gear added, and it's just really long in the tooth.
That's the one real limitation with the Ram.
And then between the Ram and Ford, where it gets tricky is that Ram will say best in class torque. That is only on the 3500.
Correct.
When equipped with the high output engine that comes with the ASIN transmission.
Correct.
So if you are not in the market for they call them 1-tons, but that used to be like the payload.
It no longer translates even closely.
We had this conversation the other day. I was like, Scott, explain to me where those numbers come from, because I can't figure out what it means.
Yeah. And now it means nothing.
Right.
It means nothing. Because like a half-ton has way more than a half-ton of payload.
One means a 30-foot toy hauler. One means a 75.
Yeah.
But, maybe one of my other beefs with the 2500 Ram, that truck only has in the 800s only.
Yeah.
In the 800s of torque, but it has kind of a clunky transmission. It's not as refined to drive around town as the Ford.
What's interesting to me is when I drive a 2500 Ram with the coil sprung rear end and the Cummins diesel, it feels like the most appropriate truck for me to drive.
It like feels
it's
good,
really it's really interesting. And maybe it's because I'm becoming more of a Luddite than I think I am, but there's something so honest about a tradesman with 2500 with a Cummins turbo diesel.
That motor pulls from the bottom.
It does.
I would almost argue that the Cummins it does more with less. It's like the Porsche kind of thing. Like there's, Porsche guys are obsessed with like the Mezger engine, water cooled 911s because they just have a certain something.
Yeah.
The Cummins just have a certain something.
True. The fact that you could take a $50,000 tradesman and you could send it to AEV right from the factory line in Michigan, and you can get a vehicle that is so appropriate for so many different things. I think that's what makes it really.
40s for $70,000.
Yeah,
you can barely buy a Jeep Gladiator Rubicon for $70,000 right now.
That's the thing.
Is that the price, like roughly out the door for the Prospector XL?
I think that's $17,740.
You may not end up with the snorkel and a couple other things, but you get the AEV
suspension, you get the wheels.
Yeah, you get the AEV treatment, and you end up with a vehicle for less than the Tremor, or about the same price of the Tremor, that will then kind of own the Tremor on the trail. In fairness to manufacturers, we really try very hard to just test vehicles in their stock state. Yeah. And because any vehicle can be modified in a way to improve it. Like Matt Scott and I were talking about the Tremor, and like my biggest beef with the Tremor is that the ride quality it's not only inconsistent with the payload, like it has about a 2,500 pound payload, and it feels like worse than a 1-ton. The ride quality isn't even consistent with the payload. It's just like totally inconsistent with the segment. Yeah. It's just very abusive.
Well, Ford does these I think that truck has 2 leaf packs.
Yeah.
Right. 2 leaf springs. I've always said this, like Ford has some of the best engineering and some of the best or worst accountants that
sure.
totally invalidate a lot of that stuff. And that's just one of the areas where they just like totally dropped the ball with that truck.
Maybe they just expect people to overload them. It would be really interesting to see what their strategy is behind it.
I had the previous generation F250 with the 6.7. I mean, honestly, like a lot of the drive line is the same aside from the 10-speed. And that thing just rode so terribly.
Yeah.
But to be fair, we drove that against the Ram back to back, and the Ram at that time rode even worse.
I think the coil sprung rear has really helped the Ram in a lot of ways. It's just that tremor was like, you knew it could get through anything, and it even had the optional front winch. So you think about how much that winch weighs. So they put that in the front, and it still didn't really help. So like, for those that are listening, the tremor is exceptional, and we're going to get to conclusions at the end of the podcast, but the tremor is exceptional, but you need to go into it knowing that you have got to change out the spring rates to your particular,
unless you're going
to your purpose, to your purpose.
Right?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think so. The Ross Monster Baja, which was a flatbed camper that I drove earlier this year, is, as far as I remember, was built on a tremor platform. And my experience driving it was actually that it was extremely comfortable to drive.
Oh,
but
gotcha.
It was fully loaded up. It had a large flatbed camper with like a roof that lifted. I mean, bed, everything. So
was the suspension changed, or was it pretty stock?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, that's a really good point. And I think that you're both right in the fact that if you were to put a 4-wheel camper in it and put a front bumper on it, and
let's not forget that ride quality and payload are inextricably linked.
They are in many ways, with the exception of air suspension. That's the only way you get around it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the same to the Ram, right? The Ram that I own, when it's empty, it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not terrible. It works, but every full-size truck I've driven so far, when it has a trailer hitched up or a camper in the back, it's way more comfortable.
It gets way better. And so I think that was the one thing for me, that there was a couple negatives that I found with the tremor. It was really unfortunate that you could only get the tremor in the 4-door with the 6-foot bed. Like, they restrict that package a little bit.
Because the tremor is a package, not a truck. The Power Wagon is a model. The tremor is something that's available from XLT, Lariat, King Ranch, and I don't think it's on Platinum.
Well, and the sad thing is that you can no longer, the popularity of the tremor is so high that they've now removed it from the XLT. So you cannot get an XLT tremor as for 2022 model year.
So it's basically an options package that can go on a variety of trims.
That's correct. Now, to Ford's credit, if you want to get a rear locker, you can still get a rear locker in any of those versions. You just can't get the front mechanical limited slip torsion style that you can in the tremor. You can't get the winch package. There's a lot that comes with the tremor, including an additional lift, much larger tires. It was extremely impressive to me on the trail.
Do they change
all things
gearing?
considered? Yes, they do. They change a lot of things in it. And the fact that you can get, front mechanical limited slip with traction control, crawl control, hill descent control, all of the off-road goodies, 16.5 winch, Warren winch on the front with synthetic line, Duratrack tires, like really premium package. And it comes in at over $70,000. So it's the recognition that you're getting a lot of payload, a lot of capability, 35-inch tires from the factory. But then the downsides are you've really got to pay attention to the ride quality, tuning it to what you do. You're limited to a 6-foot bed, which if you look at like how cool would it be to get a single cab 8-foot bed tremor, you put a Scout in the back or you put some other camper in the back of it. And with that kind of capability, you get the extended warranty and you never modify it. Like it's
just, you just run with it.
You just drive it because it's so close to perfect. And then the other thing that is noticeably different between the Tremor and the Power Wagon, other than ride quality, is the fact that the Power Wagon has a disconnectable front sway bar, which keeps the truck very level and extremely comfortable, less head toss off-road. So there is a much larger gap in capability between the two than you would expect. Where the Tremor has a little bit of an ace in the hole is a bigger tire. So it's surprising that the Power Wagon is still only available with a 33-inch tall tire.
Yeah, but you get the 5-link front end, which actually flexes.
It does. Super great flex.
The Ford has the radius arm front end, which is fine, but it's just, it's meant to haul and tow, and it's not meant to flex. That's one of the big differences between the Power Wagon and the diesel trucks is it is actually a different suspension architecture. You get the 6.4, which has the cylinder deactivation, which I think is really cool. That motor is great. I mean, it's comes from the SRT line, but I want to say it has a different cam in it, a little bit more low end torque where you're actually going to use it, which is cool. And then you get the 8 HP ZF transmission, which is fantastic. It's used in everything from Rolls-Royce. It's the only thing that Rolls-Royce and Bentley agree on is that this is the best transmission that's on the market. And you get that in the Power Wagon. I also think the interior,
it's really nice.
It's really nice.
Their Heritage 75-year truck is beautiful.
Which integrated some of the limited features and things like that. Listen, they're all nice, right? I want to say on the Super Duties, you can get massaging seats and you can kind of do whatever you want. I think that which is weird, but I feel that the fit and finish these days we're not calling it FCA, we're calling it
Stellantis.
It's like somebody went on
what's the most awkward name we could call a car company?
Corporate name generator.com and then put in a word cloud and Stellantis came up and they were like, oh yeah, that's great.
It's like the combination of synergy and all kinds of really awkward.
It's really close to synergy, which as you've taught me, run.
For those that are listening, if you're ever about to do business with someone and they use the word synergy, run.
Just hide.
Run.
So there's a lot of synergy between the 2500 and
Now, Matt Swartz, you drove the TRX recently and the Power Wagon. If I remember, it was available for you guys to drive that day in the Cinders, was it?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the Power Wagon?
Not as good as the TRX.
Not as fun. Let's say that. Equally as comfortable. Practical. I mean, the interior is beautiful on those. And I would say comparing the Ram trucks to the Ford and GMC trucks I've been in, I think I like the Ram finish a little better on the inside. Overall, it's just beautifully executed. But just as the overall driving experience with the Power Wagon, I mean, there was only one Power Wagon in our group. I should say only one that participants were driving. Nina was driving with us and she drove her Power Wagon.
Sure.
So obviously that truck's a little more subdued on the performance side of things than the TRX. It was incredible. And I mean, it did everything that the TRX did, albeit a little slower maybe, but fantastic truck.
I was so impressed with it. Our crew, we did a trip up to Northern California and we ended up testing a nimble vehicle, but we drove a Power Wagon up there and back and it was a cruiser. I mean, it was such a cruiser.
If you can get beyond the diesel thing.
Yeah, which is hard.
The Power Wagon's great. Hard. I think by nature of the transmission. And
I think like you mentioned, when you compare it to the diesel like that, the difference in the suspension, for instance, I noticed that, because my 2500 Cummins is my daily driver. So to get in the Power Wagon in an off-highway situation with roots and cinders and everything, you notice the articulation difference. You notice just how much different of a truck it is in all ways that I love, except we pull around an 8,000 pound trailer. So for us, the Cummins diesel makes more sense than the Power Wagon.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is the GMC Sierra 2500 HD AT4.
That's the one you just drove?
I just drove it. In fact, right before the article was wrapped up. And I've spent some time in the 2500s before, but never with the diesel. The Duramax, it surprised me. It's got numbers that are kind of close, like 950 foot-pounds kind of thing. Yeah. But it has a 10-speed transmission as well.
I think it's the same 10-speed that's in the Ford. I think that was a co-developed transmission.
It totally could be because they felt so similar in that way. Yeah. If you blindfolded someone, the only thing they would notice in performance difference between the Ford and the GMC is that the GMC rides a lot better. Yeah. Like that's the only way you'd know. That's the only way you would know you're in the GMC because in my mind, they were on par as far as performance. And it kind of makes sense because the Ford has a bigger tire, a heavier tire that's trying to turn. So there's probably just enough difference between the two.
I think the GMC looks the best.
It looks really sharp.
It looks really, and I am not a Chevy guy. I'm from the Midwest. It means that I was assigned a big three manufacturer at birth. Chevy just isn't that one, but GM. It looks great.
It does.
The interior is better.
The interior is really nice. It's the quietest truck in my experience.
They're so quiet.
Okay. This is for all clarity. Like if you need to buy something with a lot of payload and you want it to not destroy your spine, you buy a GMC. This thing drives like a half ton.
Yeah. Did that have the best ride quality?
By far.
Of all, hands down.
By far. Even better than the Tundra.
I don't know what they do in the cabs of those trucks, but they've just always been so quiet inside. It's been crazy. Every like GM truck product I've been in, they're the most car-like in the most complimentary way I could say that.
It's the only luxury truck brand that exists. That's GMC's only purpose is to be the luxury truck brand of GM. They build a lot of of comfort, and they address a lot of noise, vibration, and harshness. But what's interesting around GMC, and we've never even considered their products before they started this AT4 line, because it never really met our expectations for capability. But now when you buy a 2500 HD with the AT4 package, you get additional skid plates, you get a 2-inch factory lift, you get a 34-inch tall tire, you get a mechanical locking rear differential, you get an off-road mode in the driver selection mode, hill descent control, some things that I think add to kind of what an Overlander would need. The downside is it has less articulation than the solid axle trucks.
The torsion bar front still?
It is, and independent. Yeah. And I think that that's going to change fairly soon, but the architecture of the chassis.
Like your 1500 has the coil spring,
it does.
Coil over front end. Like,
it does.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that
it's coming.
Still on.
Yeah, it's coming, but the current model, it doesn't have that. So it's still torsion suspended, fairly limited overall travel, which you do notice like in larger events or once the speed starts to increase. So you start to really notice that. For me, there's just not a lot of aftermarket support either for the GMC vehicles where, and again, we've come back to this and maybe in some way we are a fanboy of AEV. We don't want to try to disguise a bias.
I am a fanboy of AEV.
Yeah. We don't want to,
I'm going to disclose that.
Yeah. We don't want to disguise a bias that works. It's fair. It's exactly. It works and it has worked for a long time. They put a lot of thought into the products that they make.
It's just an entire system.
Correct. That's well integrated.
The engineering component of it too. I mean, that, for sure. I've had some conversations with folks who know a lot more about vehicles than I do. And with AV, it always comes back to they approach any kind of vehicle modification from an engineering standpoint. They're going to maintain angles and geometry and all the engineering that was done for the OEM truck. And that's why their stuff works.
It's so true. And because that was their strategy, Matt, they actually now, when they make something, the OEM can decide to now offer it as a factory option. There's no other aftermarket company that I'm aware of. ARB does a little bit of that. The things that AEV make, they are built to the requirements of a factory delivered option. So that's why you all of a sudden see a Bison come into the Planet, and because all of a sudden all this AEV stuff is now available on the lot at the dealership, which is really unusual. Yeah, so we don't need to like the AEV stuff.
This is another AEV tangent. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you talk about full size trucks, you just
end up going down that road. Yeah,
I mean, like a Prospector XL is just like
so rad.
It's the baddest MF on the road. Like it just works.
Well, and for a guy who drives a TRX every day, like you get to say that. You get to say that. You get to say that.
Mine's faster.
Yeah. I mean, a TRX is pretty bad. That's pretty badass. Yeah. So what I found with the GMC is highest payload for a 2500 in the test.
What was it?
It was over 3,000 pounds.
Wow.
Dang.
Exactly. That's so like stick a camper on the back of it and a bunch of bumpers and everything else. And it's like, meh. So no problem. Yeah. It has one of the better towing capabilities in the test as well. And then it has the best ride quality. So somehow GM has found a way to make something carry a lot of weight and also ride well.
I will give them the most improved award. Like I know that this isn't an award that I can actually give, but
you just did.
But I'm giving it.
You just did.
I will say that GM product, like GM trucks, specifically like the 1500 and the 2500.
Sure.
Which is, that is GM trucks. That's pretty much all of them. Definitely the most improved. Like they look good. The fit and finish is much better. Interior, way better.
Yeah. When you look at full size trucks, that 3-liter 10-speed automatic 1500, pick a Sierra or pick a Chevrolet ZR2 or whatever you want to pick. That combo is kind of magic. And then nobody really makes that yet. So the fact that GM is able to stand alone with, especially now with the AT4X, so you can get front and rear lockers, diesel drivetrain, 10-speed automatic.
It's actually
pretty special.
It's what we've all been asking for.
Sure.
And I'm not saying no one's buying it, but then they just continue buying Fords and Rams.
Yeah, except that they're crushing it. Their AT4.
And I'm glad they're crushing it.
Their AT4 package is crushing it.
I see so many of those AT4, the breeder barge thing.
Talk to me. I don't know what you're saying.
No, the big ones with that seat like 14.
Oh yeah, children. Yeah, the Yukon.
The Yukon. I call them breeder barges because only people who are on this planet to just have a shit of kids drive them. But at least now they're like kind of
they got a lift
looking.
kit. Yeah, they got a lift kit.
You know, like it's a cool looking breeder barge. Like it's like
whereas the AT4 Yukon, it looks great.
Yeah.
And it's got anyways, we don't need to spend a bunch of time on that. So the things that I found on the 2500 that I cared for less was the fact that it doesn't have a driver selectable locker. I mean, we're in the age where that is now commonplace.
Just give me the button.
Give me the button, please, because it actually works. It's the best solution because if you turn it off, the car still has traction control and they can tune it to be aggressive. Whereas when you lock it, you stop spinning. And even the Tundra now has a rear locking differential. So I suspect that GMC is very aware of that because this is an interesting attribute that I found with this 2500. It has to spin the wheels.
It's like the Land Rover thing where it's like you're supposed to be the guys.
Yeah.
Someone shuts you down.
Yeah.
Because GM has the people on their development team that know this.
They know that. And
someone is just not listening to them.
It'll come. The 1500 AT4X front and rear driver selectable lockers. So they know that needs to happen. The Bison, the ZR2 driver selectable lockers. So they're just moving them through the line now. When you buy a 2500 HD today, lots of wheel spin. They can't intervene with traction control because if you do, then it won't lock the rear. So it's like they're kind of in this catch-22 of like, I need to allow wheel spin for the rear mechanical locker to lock.
Do you think that they're worried about the rear axle strength?
No. I mean, the rear axle on that 2500 is massive. Like maybe on the 1500, it's more of a concern. I don't know that. I know that there's a tire size recommended limitation on the 1500, but on the 2500, it's a gigantic rear axle. Yeah. The traction control needs to have less intervention in order to allow the rear locker to engage. So once they put a driver selectable locker, then the problem solved. That was one thing that I noticed. The other thing that's also a bit of a complication is the shape of the wheel wells. They look really handsome, but they're very square. And fairly tight.
For those of us looking
at the YouTubes,
watch us on YouTube. It's a lot like this Overland Journal magazine. You see, most car companies have
wheel wells like that.
Wheel wells like this. The circle goes in here, and it kind of allows it to move up and down.
That's true.
They've done it like this, which means they can fit this tiny little thing.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you mess with lift or whatever, it ends up.
It just doesn't fit. Yeah, it just doesn't fit.
Subscribe now.
So that's a challenge with the GMC is the wheel well opening shape. Chevrolet has addressed that. Their new trucks are all round wheel well openings, so they can already fit a larger tire. No doubt GMC will address that too. But in the current model that we're testing, we are limited to about a 35, 36 inch tall tire on a 2500, which like a Power Wagon can fit a 37 kind of off the lot. Yeah. So,
I mean, let's also take a step back. Let's check our tire privilege at the door. 35s are quite large. I mean, I remember when 35s were like, they were the bee's knees. I mean, if you had a TJ on 35s, you were
monster truck.
You were king of the cornfield.
Yeah.
And now it's like,
are you talking about you, Matt?
Yeah. Okay. I was the king of the cornfield.
I remember that, TJ.
It was terrible. It's absolutely horrible. It was everything. It was like I went through the built catalog and added it all. And then I drove it and it didn't really work.
Yeah. You're like, Scott, why am I stuck?
Why am I stuck? One, I didn't know how to drive. And two.
Yeah, lockers would have been a good idea.
But bro, did you see my light bars?
They were sick. They were sick.
All three of them?
Sick. Yeah, exactly. They were sick.
This was actually pre-light bar.
Yeah.
I don't actually know if I had any lights.
You just had 35 KC highlights.
Yeah.
Driving lights.
No, I think I had the Hella 500s from Walmart because I could afford them.
I had those too. I had those too for sure.
Yeah. They were like $47.
And a special thanks to this week's sponsor, Dometic. When you're heading out, you don't want anything to hold you back. Whether you're planning a week-long adventure or a quick overnight trip to your favorite outdoor spot, we've got you. Dometic's CFX3 powered cooler is designed with any size adventure in mind. The CFX3 allows you to bring more of your favorite food and drink along for the ride, no matter how far you plan to go. Available in multiple sizes, the CFX3 is built for the demands of outdoor use and comes with a handy app that gives you complete control at your fingertips. It's the state-of-the-art, designed for rugged use cooler that you can rely on and enjoy for years to come. All right, so the next vehicle we're going to talk about, the Nissan Titan XD Pro 4X.
So here's my biggest thing with this is, do you actually have to have a Costco membership card to buy a Nissan? Because I can't figure out why you would.
We're going to feel bad if we say all this stuff.
Can I just be honest? Because it was like the worst car I have driven. I didn't drive the XD, but I drove the Titan,
the new Titan.
And it had some kind of name that you would expect from like a Costco Kirkland vodka or rum.
Maybe it was the Kirkland edition.
It could have been the Kirkland edition. That's what I called it.
You get a pair of elastic waistbanded jeans with it.
You do.
Was terrible.
Velcro shoes.
I don't know how they can make it that bad. Yeah. Like knowing that, it was worse than the Tundra coming out that was out. And they knew that they were coming out with a new one. I just don't understand the business. I don't know why you buy a Nissan. I'm sorry. I'm just going to be real honest.
Can we be fair to Costco and Kirkland and admit that they're both awesome?
That's true. It's true.
Yeah, they're good. Okay. Like they offer a lot of value. Except for when I drove the Nissan Titan Kirkland Reserve, it was more expensive than like the equivalent Ford King Ranch.
It was expensive.
Wow.
There was nothing there. I remember when the XD came out with the Cummins,
which is cool.
Which was really cool. Except that when you went to the lot to buy one, they didn't deal on them. Like you could go get a F-250 with a 6.7 or a Ram or something for thousands less that had more power, more torque, more payload, more everything. Kind of think that they've just put themselves in the same position. Like I don't know how many like rental car fleets buy these things or how many like corporate lease business car people buy them. I don't get them. I just don't get them.
Yeah. And
I think the Fender sound system's cool though.
And then they're so different than the Frontier. So like the Frontier has this legacy of reliability. Yeah. It's super capable and all that. I think the advantage that an XD has is that you end up with this kind of Japanese build quality reliability with over 2,000 pounds of payload. So it makes it a little bit competitive. They came out with a car and then the new Tundra hits and what do you do? I mean, I think the challenge right now is it loses the Cummins, which I thought was a gem of a little motor. And so now you've got this 400 horsepower V8. I think it's 5.7. 5.9.
Endurance V8 is what they call it.
If you just get in it and drive it, it's pretty underwhelming. If you go into trailer mode, then it gives you, or if you go into towing mode, it gives you, the transmission starts to wake up a little bit. And there's some things that you can do to make the vehicle feel a lot more sporty. And if I did all of those things and I started to drive it more aggressively, then the car started to change my opinion a little bit. But I think the challenge is when you look at the approach angle, if you look at the breakover angle, if you look any of the attributes that we need, it just doesn't hit the mark.
It's minor league in the major league. There's nothing wrong with going and watching a minor league baseball game.
Yeah.
It's really entertaining. It's cool. It's whatever. But when you try and price it like a major league game,
sure.
Like there has to be value. And that's just what I'm not getting from a lot of Nissan's products these days is that they're pricing themselves in the major league, but they're not bringing their A game.
Yeah. Or they become like deeply discounted at the dealership. Give the consumer a reason to go check them out. Yeah. Give them an argument to come consider the vehicle. The limited aftermarket support is also another challenge, I think, for Nissan. If I was Nissan,
there's some Nissan people out there.
A little bit, but very limited compared to like a Tundra, for example. I mean, if I was king for a day of Nissan, I would focus on the Titan being the vehicle that the Tundra is not. So I would make it a 3/4 ton, make it have payload and towing capability, and I would make it have ground clearance.
And 3/4 ton though?
It is, but I would just make sure that it was like a real 3/4 ton, like 2,600 pounds of payload and instead of 2,200. And I would make sure that it had a Japanese diesel in it. And I would make sure that it became the vehicle, something very different, I think would be a big advantage to Nissan on that. And it's not to take away from the fact that I think a Titan is just a fine full-size truck. But when you're talking about one of the most competitive automotive segments on the planet, you really got to bring your A game, not your B game. So
yeah, Pabst Blue Ribbon right here was a fine beer in 1893 when it was selected as America's best beer. You would not enter Pabst Blue Ribbon in a modern beer competition.
You would not.
And the Nissan Titan just does not feel modern. You know, it's got that new 9-speed transmission, but it feels a bit clunky. I think that
it's slow to shift.
Yeah, it's slow to shift. I think the driving dynamics are pretty good. The vehicle feels relatively lively.
and comfortable. Yeah.
But then you get like I always pick on manufacturers for this. They get the little molding lines on places like this fake leather plastic. And then there'll be like a line that you can see on the edge where it was molded.
Sure.
And that's just like,
I see that. It's like, I see that.
I see that you wouldn't see that. I mean, you get it in Fords, but they just put it in like inconvenient places where you touch it, like, like on the door handle where you like grab it on like,
it's like, why is that so pokey?
It's like, it's fully getting my fingerprints. You don't get that in the Rams. You don't get that in the Toyotas.
No. Not at all.
It's a really small example. I think that where Nissans make a lot of sense, where the Frontier, where the Titan and that kind of stuff is, people buy them, presumably like Costco leases them for their employees as a Kirkland special. And then they get rid of them and they just like fall off the face of the earth with resale. And then they're a really attractive proposition. If you're in the market for a used vehicle,
sure,
I think that the Titan is a fantastic choice because then the value proposition starts to actually come into play.
You get a lot of truck for the money.
Do I want to have a Ram 2500 with 100,000 miles for $10,000 less than I paid for it? Or do I want to have a good Nick, easy to service, cheap to service Titan for half of that? That's where I really think the Nissan comes into its range.
And that's tough for Nissan, which is trying to sell new cars.
Exactly.
That's very difficult.
Does anybody here have a compelling argument as to why they should buy a Nissan Titan over anything else that we've talked about?
No, especially since the small displacement Cummins.
I would argue as a new car buyer, it is actually the most expensive because it's going to depreciate the most.
Yeah.
It came in at $57,000 without the diesel, because the diesel is no longer available. When I looked at the pros and cons on it, one of the pros is it does have a 60-to-1 low range. So a lot of control off-road. You can get a rear locking differential, which is something like you can't get on the Ram 2500, for example. And then it does have a 5-year, 100,000 mile warranty, which is not surprising because Nissan makes quality, reliable vehicles.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, very clearance restricted, and a very sluggish drivetrain, like an uninspiring drivetrain.
But for $57,000, you can get a really nice Tundra.
Yeah.
You can get a Power Wagon.
Oh, yeah.
You can get a diesel 2500 Ram.
Yeah, you can get a standard
Tremor 7.3 Godzilla Ford Super Duty.
Correct.
None of these things are in the same league.
Yeah, totally different.
Unfortunately for Nissan.
No, totally different.
Like I've met a lot of people from Nissan. They're really nice folks.
I hope they crush it with the Frontier.
The new Frontier looks so good.
I hope they crush it with the Frontier so that then they feel emboldened to do something with the Titan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
So Tundra's next.
Yeah.
And you're the only one that's actually driven.
We talked through
so me and Matt are going to drink beer.
We talked through the Power Wagon, of course, pros, class leading capability, super comfortable.
Diesel aside, of all of these vehicles, I would get the Power Wagon.
But what about that 1,500 pound payload? Like, how does that sit with you? I'm just curious.
It's a valid point, right? When you do look at the Tremor with the 7.3, which is going to be basically the same price point as the Power Wagon, I just like the fit and finish of the Power Wagon more. I like its off-road performance more.
Yeah.
I do think that it struggles. And
I mean, like, look at that articulation.
It's pretty gnarly
in the Power Wagon. I mean, that's insane.
For those
that's factory.
You that don't have the upcoming issue of Overland Journal on your iPad, you can see this in the upcoming issue of Overland Journal.
Yeah. Paula, the amazing producer, is going to put in some rich media with this. That's going to be kind of fun. So
Paula 22.
Paula 22 for sure. Paula for president 22. We talked about the Tradesman. I'm a big believer in the Tradesman package. Your Lariat was a really, really nice truck, but there is something about the fact that you can buy this, and maybe it's even the name, but like when I see a rubber floor mat.
Yeah. It's stupid to buy one. It ends up costing you more money in the long run.
You think so?
If you make it I've done this for almost every full size truck I've bought, and you make a spreadsheet, right? The market is flooded with the XLs, XLTs, tradesmen's, generalizing for most of the markets, right? When it comes on the used market, and everything's depreciated down. The Lariat, the King Ranch, the Laramie, those kinds of things, with exception of like the Platinums and the Limiteds, right? Like the very upper echelon, those do tend to have a bit of a value proposition that drops off. It's usually people want the leather seats. They want the kind of the nicer stuff. I feel like that's the largest market, and that those are the trucks that hold their value the most. So that's the one thing I always encourage people to look at, is not just the purchase price. Because if you're financing it, the purchase price is it's going to be within $25 to $50 a month, but you actually may be throwing away more money and getting less of a truck when you go to get rid of it in a couple of years. And people think I'm crazy, but honestly look at it. Cause like the 50,
you're probably right.
The $55,000 tradesman, they do equip those things pretty well. They put a heated steering wheel, available heated seats. They've kind of recognized that these are just basic things that people want these days. They do tend to depreciate more. Like the Power Wagons always have a great resale value because they're a power wagon, right? Like they are something. Raptors, TRXs, like these desirable trucks. People always want them because they're more desirable and they will pay more for them as they depreciate. More people in the population can afford them. So that isn't. That's the Matt Scott gaming thing.
But it's also a totally valid argument, particularly if you're not planning to keep the vehicle for that long. I mean, the last car that I owned, I drove for 12 years. So like the G-Wagon, I literally drove the wheels off it. I would probably still want the tradesman without the giant screen. I want the rubber floor mats. I mean, up until 2018, you could still buy a Ram with a manual transmission,
which is awesome.
Or maybe even 2019. But I mean, it's heartbreaking that it's no longer available. I understand it. It is not Ram's fault. It's our fault. Like those of us at scale. Yeah. Those of us at the table, everybody listening.
And the autos are just so good these days.
Yeah. If we don't buy manual transmissions, they're going to stop selling them. So it's like, it's not the manufacturer's fault that they stopped selling them.
And the manuals couldn't handle the amount of torque.
That's true. They were very limited on that for sure. I remember driving Dave Harriton's like tray bed, single cab, 2500 manual maybe 3500 manual transmission. It was just so joyful because it was so like fit for purpose, but they just not really available anymore. Although I do every once in a while, like go onto Car Gurus or whatever and like search for that truck because part of me just wants to buy it just because, but
I think Mario bought it.
Yeah, he did.
It's in Prescott, bro.
Yeah. Dave reached out. He's like, hey, you want to buy my truck? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And I should have, of course, but congratulations, Mario. The tradesman comes in at about a 2,500 pound payload, 55 grand with a diesel motor. I mean, it is just almost free. I mean, it's silly to say that, but when you look at how expensive cars are today, to get a Cummins turbo diesel 2,500 pickup with four-wheel drive,
500,000 mile truck.
It is.
That was the most compelling reason for us. I mean, it's the best deal.
It's by far.
Did you get a tradesman?
I did. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And I have a tradesman owner here. Sorry for insulting your financial purchase.
Well, it's not insulting. I think you made a really good point. If you are a car owner who does plan to sell or trade your car in on a somewhat regular interval, that is absolutely a smart thing to consider. Like in our case, I don't think we will. I think we're hoping to keep the truck, pay it off and just own it and drive.
How long have you had your Toyota?
We sold the Prius.
Yeah, but how long did you have that?
Oh man. I mean, it was a 2008 and we just sold it this year.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So like you're going to get all of that you want out of that tradesman.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in our case, like I just couldn't afford all the fancy trim stuff. It's awesome to have the, like we've said, like the Rams are incredible, the high end ones, but I mean, the tradesman is everything we needed. And I have ambitions of once we're done towing the Airstream around, pulling the box off and doing a flatbed camper. I mean,
sure.
I just won't feel bad about like doing that to a higher trim level truck.
Totally.
Maybe we'll get beat up a little bit more, but either way, it is so affordable. And for people that are looking at these full size trucks and thinking, how can I ever afford that? Like the tradesman is a way into that segment of vehicle, at least it was for us. And it's so cool to be able to get that.
I mean, just compare that vehicle to just about anything else. Like it's pretty hard to actually buy a 4Runner for less money than that. I mean, you kind of got to work at it to buy a Wrangler with some capability for less than that. For what that comes with, it's unbelievable.
And you have to think that $10,000 of that purchase price is the motor. So I think it's $9,000.
Oh, it's a $9,000 option.
Yeah,
totally.
Option. Yeah,
totally.
I think it's like $9,840 or something. Not that
sounds
I was
right.
just building a 3,500 online today. It actually kind of makes you question, like, let's talk same company, Gladiator.
Yeah,
Gladiators are now rapidly approaching the 70s.
Oh yeah, you buy a diesel Rubicon, you're there all day long. Well, you're 70.
What has more value?
The Ram is designed to haul heavy stuff around,
and the dimensions aren't that different. The Gladiator's better around town and cheaper to service.
And they're awesome. They look great. I mean, there's so many upsides. But when we talk about full size trucks, I mean, and we'll get to that at the end, like our own personal picks. But so when it comes to the pros and cons on that tradesman, you're talking about an exceptional value with the diesel drivetrain. It's really amazing.
And a diesel drivetrain that you can service, which I think is like, I'm rambling. I talked with the 267s. Kind of weird. I owned both at the same time. I had a 2500, which I traded on the TRX when I had an opportunity to grab one. And I have my Earth Roamer, which has the 6.7, same drivetrain or same engine that is currently in the modern ones. It terrifies me to change a belt. I think I have to take off like intercooler tubes and intake and coolant lines and all this kind of stuff to get to it. Where with the Cummins, it was like, there's the injector pump, there's the alternator, there's the starter, because it's
you can see motor. all the rattly bits. Yeah, you can see them all. Yeah.
I think for, that's why like what you're trying to do is drive it into the ground. Like I would much rather in 10 or 15 years. I mean, truthfully, to service the 6.7, most of the time you take the cab off. When the 6.7 Ford, sure. Let me just clarify this. When my 6.7 blew up, they had to disassemble the entire front end of the truck because they couldn't take the cab off because of the Earth Roamer camper on the back. It was a nightmare. I think there's just so much merit to the 6.7 Cummins. It might not have the highest end torque but how it makes the power there. Chime in, Matt, but like there's something to that motor.
It's special. Like when you push the accelerator down, and especially like when the Airstream's being pulled behind it, it's got this, it's incredible. I mean,
like a locomotive.
Yeah. And you feel it. Like you feel this like low frequency vibration from it, and you're just like, man, yes, there it is.
Oh yeah, go baby.
No, it's incredible. I mean, we'll pull the Airstream. It will pull it at 90 miles an hour if we want.
Amazing.
Not that that's safe, but it's just it's incredible what you're getting.
Yeah,
in that
there's a lot, and the fact that you end up with this Cummins turbo diesel, you end up with a coil sprung rear suspension in the 2500, and then you end up with the availability of having the AEV Prospector package thrown on it and coming in at about the same price as a Tremor. So when you just start to actually do the real world numbers, it becomes very compelling. Now like anything, there's a con too. I think the lack of a rear factory locking differential is a downside.
It's a deal.
It has the off-road package, which Matt has in his, and you had both Matts had in their trucks. It has a limited slip differential, which combined with an aggressive traction control system is actually very impressive off-road. So I don't want to make it think like the vehicle is not capable, but there's something about the control that comes with having a driver selectable locker that I think is really advantageous. It lacks a rear locking differential, manually selectable, and then it comes with a 6-speed automatic. So you end up with a much less low range crawl control. You end up with these noticeable shifts. You end up with poor fuel economy compared to the Ford, for example, which the Cummins has always kind of won the fuel economy game. So the fact that the engine is very efficient, but the transmission doesn't fully take advantage of it. Those are some things worth noting, I think, on the 2500.
I was actually curious about that, and maybe you can speak to that, but fuel economy across all of these vehicles, what did the best in terms of fuel economy?
All right. I have the chart here.
Oh man, this guy's got a chart.
The one that did the very best was the Tundra, which makes a lot of sense. These were our observed fuel economy. So I don't drive.
There's no like fixed test loop EPA.
No, there's not. This is like
what we got when we used it.
Exactly.
Assume that you're probably kind of driving like we are. We're not trying to hypermile.
Yeah, there was no attempt to hypermile. I don't drive fast, but I certainly do not drive slow. In the Tundra, we were able to get 18.2 miles per gallon. In the one that was a bit of a surprise was the Ford Tremor. So, and it's really about that 10-speed automatic. So we got about 18 miles per gallon in that. Now, here's the thing. At the end of the day, they were all extremely close with the exception of the Power Wagon. Here we go. Ford Tremor, 18 miles per gallon. Sierra 2500, 17.1. Nissan XD 17.5, Ram 2500 Tradesman 17.8, Toyota Tundra 18.2, and then the Power Wagon was 14.2.
Oh, wow.
So
they probably all cost about the same to run though.
Yeah.
Well, except for the other gas versions.
Yeah, the Tundra would be probably the least
cost more. Yeah.
Yeah, the Tundra would probably be the least expensive overall to operate. And the Tundra, which we're going to move into that right now, the Tundra is a ripper. I mean, it looks good. It is very fast. If you drive it with the iForce, It's very, very fast. Like
that's the hybrid with the turbo.
Yeah. There are people now that are racing it against the Ford Raptors because it's super fast. So the iForce hybrid that makes 583 foot-pounds of torque and almost 500 horsepower, it's quick. And with that 5-link rear suspension, it just works. So the interesting thing about the Tundra, it's something that I think is important to spend some time on because it's a Toyota product, which is very popular with our listenership and our readership. But the Tundra was always just a really good truck. Like if somebody wanted to tow their boat, or they did a lot of like Home Depot runs, or they had a big family or whatever.
The Tundra was always the vehicle that you could soundly recommend to somebody that you actually wanted to talk to after they bought it.
Yeah. Like there's never going to be disappointed in a Tundra for sure. Toyota is always super conservative on everything. So the Tundra's always had terrible payload. Like nobody really cared. I mean, you're just like, let's just treat it like a 1-ton. And then somehow they magically survive.
Like those little Toyota pickups that you see.
Totally.
Somebody swapped like a dually rear axle.
Totally. And then an entire RV on the back of it. Yeah. And that's, I mean, you look at CNN at night and here's a 50 cal plus a rocket launcher and 87 dudes hanging off of the back of a Hilux. That's the reality of what we see with the Tundras, particularly in the Overland space, is that they just load, they don't even pay attention to payload, but there's a pretty heavy one on the cover.
Sorry, Clay, but you did not pay attention to payload on this one.
Maybe he did.
No. Have you seen that Instagram account? It's called Toyotas of War.
It's so good.
Yeah, that one.
I've been featured on it several times. It terrifies me.
It's so good. Yeah, it's such a great one. Tundra is an all new vehicle. I mean, there is not a single part that's shared with the previous model. So we're going to talk about the highlights around the Tundra. So the Tundra shares the same chassis as the 300 series Land Cruiser. So like when you start the conversation with the new Tundra is built on the Land Cruiser chassis, that's already a showstopper. Yeah, it's already amazing. They got rid of the leaf springs on the rear. They have a 5-link. You can get an airbag suspension depending upon the model. It's got a locking rear differential now. It's got a TRD Pro with additional lift, great suspension, all those other things. It drives very nice. And it also drives at speed very confidently. And that is something that in full-size trucks is not always the case. Full-size trucks tend to surprise you a little bit. And that's something that I don't like as an evaluator. I don't like it when a vehicle's like, you're hanging it out, you're pushing the limits. And
goes over the limit.
Yeah, exactly. And then things start to fall apart very quickly. That I don't like to see. The Tundra does not do that. The Tundra is predictable. Howling tires, predictable. Tires are howling more. It's very neutral. So now you're getting a little bit of oversteer, like I'm talking on the pavement, pushing this truck like you would a sports car. And it's extremely predictable all the way and past the limits, which is unusual in this segment. The engine is a joy to drive. People are going to get hung up on the fact that you're going from a 5.7 to a 3.5. Please get over it because
the 5.7 was so ancient.
Yeah. And it was just not efficient.
Wasn't a good motor.
It was super reliable, like literally throw it off a cliff kind of a motor, but it was never efficient. And it never did a good job of moving either the Land Cruiser or the Tundra around. Whereas this, with their 10-speed transmission, it's just really impressive. I mean, it literally is impressive on the road and off road, which I think is a big deal. The fact that the Toyota has come around to making such a powerful engine out of a small displacement. Their EPA highway is 22 miles to the gallon. You can get it with a hybrid drivetrain as well, which makes it even more powerful. So their premium motor gets better gas mileage. It's faster. I mean, it's really like a 7-second truck. It's really fast. And people have even done a little better than that. So yeah, compared to the TRX, but people have even done better than that. I mean, like when they're racing them now.
I'm just being who I am.
The fact that you get multi-terrain select, rear locking differential, definitely the best handling truck in the test. Land Cruiser kind of underpinnings, which is extremely impressive. But then there's also some cons. So you would think that this 5-link would have better articulation. Nope. It actually has less articulation than the outgoing truck.
Oh, okay.
We found out why. And the reason for it is because of the packaging, the rear suspension, where they have to put the shocks are much further out. So the more inboard you make a shock, for 1 inch of movement of the tire ends up being much less than 1 inch of movement of the shock. So the further you put that shock absorber out to the tires, or the closer you get them to the tires outboard, then the longer the shock needs to be. So they were limited on packaging. When it came to the Land Cruiser, they didn't have the same packaging constraints because it isn't a bed and there's a occupant, a passenger area. So the Land Cruiser has a lot of articulation. The Tundra has less. So you notice that. So it lifts a wheel pretty easily. It still feels very stable. It's a wide truck. It's not like it's unsettling or anything like that, but you would hope that it would get more articulation. So how do they solve that as Toyota? Stick a locker in the back and then you don't care. They fixed the problem, which fortunately they did that. Fortunately, they didn't say, oh, A-Track's going to solve the problem, and because it wouldn't have.
But the aftermarket will figure that out.
Yeah.
And honestly, an outboarded shock also has some advantages.
Tons of advantage. Stability.
Mm-hmm.
This truck will tow 12,000 pounds. And in the TRD Pro variant, you end up with a 1,600 pound payload. It's the reason why the truck didn't do better in the test, is that at the end of the day, it's not Toyota's fault that it's a half-ton truck. It's really not. It's just the fact that there are medium-sized trucks, there are mid-sized trucks that have nearly the same payload as a Tundra. And so when you look at a Ranger that has pretty much the same payload, it makes you realize that Toyota still has a lot more that they can do on the payload front. And if they can take a little bit of a risk and realize that there are going to be customers that need something closer to that 2,000, 2,200 pound payload, so that true 1-ton payload, then they're going to end up, I think, doing a lot better in this segment, particularly in Overland.
I mean, again, you're the only one that's driven this truck. What's the payload on I don't know, what do they call their Laramie or their, it's not the TRD, it's not the performance truck. It's, it's got leather seats or whatever. It's, the one that most people buy.
Oh yeah. So they have a limited edition, which is extremely popular. I think they've got some new editions coming out that I don't think I'm allowed to speak to at this point, but so they've got some new
Texas edition.
Well, they do have a 1794, which I can talk about. That's been released.
Makes me cringe.
Yeah.
It's like pandering to Texans. It's like, you're from Texas.
That's an interesting.
Give you a truck. That's freedom. Pick it out at the Texas Truck Rodeo, and we're gonna take it to Texas State Fair, and you're gonna love this Toyota Tundra. We're even gonna make it in Texas. Except everybody from Texas is from like Cleveland, Ohio, or something now.
Anymore, for sure.
Yeah, and Toyota, they're from like Torrance.
Well, they're from Japan, but yeah.
Well, like all the people that used to work for Toyota, that work for Toyota in Texas now, are from Torrance.
That's true.
But the Texas Truck Rodeo, 1794, freedom.
All of this
is pandering.
You speak lots of
it's pandering.
It's very valid. The 1794 comes from the property that the manufacturing plant is on was a ranch.
Oh,
and it was the 1794. Okay. So the ranch
I thought that was like the Texas State.
So it's actually a thing. It's actually a thing.
Oh,
is that in 1794 the ranch started, the current manufacturing plant is built on. So it's kind of a cool story. It's a little more
Cowboys. You should buy this because we're going to make you rich when we buy your ranch for our factory.
Well, yeah, Texans know that.
It's like
Texans know land and oil, don't they?
It's like the King Ranch. It's like I don't think Ford has ever been near the King Ranch.
Yeah, no, they need the King Ranch to breed all of the cows that go into the leather in the King Ranch, I think.
Yeah.
So they do have a 1794, and you get it. You can put a TRD package on it, which is kind of nice. So anything you can add the TRD to, so you can add a rear locker to pretty much anything. But if you want air suspension, you can't get the TRD package. So let's say you end up with a 1794 TRD where it's got all of the fancy stuff and the longer wheelbase. You can get a 4-door, 6.5 foot bed now. You start ending up in the like 1,400 pound payload area.
Oh, so it goes down from the TRD. Because what I was trying to make an argument for was like, I wonder if with the TRD Pro package, if they're...
The only way you game it is to do an SR5 TRD. That's the only way you game it. And it's important for everybody listening to know that. So if you want to game the TRD game or the Tundra game, you buy SR5 TRD, and then that gets you at about 1,820 pounds of payload, which is starting to be very respectable. So
it's like basically a Ford Ranger.
It's more than a Ford Ranger, to Toyota's credit. And that has not been the case with them. So I think, maybe you and I want to take some credit for this, because we love Toyotas, but we also want Toyota to give us some payload. Maybe they're listening. And now you can buy a Tundra with very close to 2,000 pounds of payload.
That's cool.
Which is awesome.
I'm down. That's all because of me. I'm not going to give you any credit. I don't even know these people.
You brought the beer.
I brought established in Milwaukee, 1844, just like the ranch was in 1794. You should definitely buy our pickup trucks, Texas. So Tundra,
the pros.
If you're going to do the Gladiator.
Okay. Tundra gets a thumbs up.
Tundra gets the thumbs up?
It gets a thumbs up because people are going to still load them to the moon, but it's actually ready for that now.
It's still going to work.
And it's going to work fine. I mean, like those of us who own businesses, we can't do that. But like, anyways, we don't need to go into the payload train for too long today, but you get a rear locking differential, you get multi-terrain select, you get the best handling truck in the segment, Land Cruiser chassis. The downsides are you have less articulation than the outgoing model, which is kind of a surprise. This is the craziest thing. You buy a TRD Pro, you buy their off-road version of the truck, you do not and cannot get front recovery points. Do they think it's never going to get stuck? Or like, and what they said was it's something about aero requirements or whatever. Every manufacturer on the planet has figured that out. You put little covers on the bumper. Like if it's aero, I get it. Like it's aero. It's the only way you get to what you're trying to do. I'm not buying it at all.
Skeptical cat is skeptical.
Yeah. And it's rare that I'm that skeptical, but I'm super skeptical. I actually think that they designed an amazing truck. And one day they woke up and they're like, oh my gosh, we totally forgot front recovery points. I mean, that's all I can think of because it makes no sense. Because any other truck you look at, AT4, GMC, any of the other trucks you look at it, big red tow hooks on the front.
Yeah.
If you look at a Tacoma,
does it have like
big red tow hooks on the front.
Does it have like a lashing point?
It has nothing on the front.
This is really great information to know because I'm just going to make recovery points for the front of these now.
Yeah. So like all they needed to do was like in the bumper, you create like a little cap. If you buy a Porsche Cayenne or if you buy a, you take the little cap off, you screw a little thing in. Exactly. So maybe on the Tundra, what they do is you have a cap and then underneath there is the cool red tow hooks.
Are you skeptical of that? I'm skeptical.
I'm not buying. I'm totally not buying it.
That's crucial to have recovery points.
Super crucial. Well, especially when the vehicle is specifically designed for off-road use.
Yeah.
So you have to engineer in proper recovery points.
That's why in Texas we get the 1794 edition that has recovery point.
Well, it is a Toyota, so it's going to have plenty of aftermarket support.
Yeah, so that's totally valid. It was just interesting. Like it's just interesting that's like you get the locker, you get great tires, you get great suspension, Fox suspension, you get all of this stuff, and then there's not a single recovery point on the truck other than the receiver hitch, which is not optimal. Anyways, like it's easy to be very
and they're trying to
ingratiated to Toyota because they're
TRX kind of thing.
Maybe. I don't think so.
The TRD Pro has always been like a really smart choice, but
I think so.
It's always been I don't want to say the Costco version of a Raptor, but
no, I don't think they're even close. I think it's just really capable.
Different, yeah.
I think you would compare a TRD Pro to a Power Wagon.
Yeah.
In my mind, because it's really good. It's a really, really good truck, and they're going to sell a ton of them. Deservedly. I would love to find a way to get, maybe they don't call it the TRD, maybe they call it the Overlander in honor of Clay and his involvement or whatever. They call it something that gives us the capability and the capacity that we need. Even 2,000 pounds or 2,200 pounds starts to solve a lot of problems. I guess the question
is, how does it, and I don't have this in front of me, but how does that stack up to a 1,500, to a half-ton truck? Because it's a half-ton truck with a 3/4-ton payload. Maybe they still think that means something.
Yeah,
half-ton, 3/4, 1 ton.
I don't know. I mean, they're competitive with a lot of the vehicles on the market. The one outlier is the Ford F-150, and it's actually worth talking about for a second before we wrap up. But the Ford F-150 is this interesting vehicle that you can actually spec up to 3,000 pounds of payload.
It's crazy.
I think we kind of got to put the whole idea of what a half ton and a 3/4 ton means, because these trucks have so many options and they can be configured in so many ways. But you could buy a Ford 4-wheel drive, regular cab, 8-foot bed F-150 with a 3,000 pound payload, which is more than your 2,500, Matt.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy. Yeah. So it's totally possible
on
to do
your 2,500.
I think it's between like 2,300 and 2,400 on ours.
I think on mine it was like 1,800. It wasn't.
It could be because yours was really optioned up.
Yeah, it wasn't that much.
Yeah,
which was surprising.
It starts to, once we add the options and the sunroofs and all that other stuff, it really does take an impact for sure.
So we should wrap this up.
We should. So Matt Swartz, give me your pick. I mean, you drive a 2,500 Tradesman.
I was going to say this is going to be a little biased because I own the Tradesman.
Would you buy it again now that you've driven it for 6-8 months?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's nice. It's so comfortable. It does everything I want. It's such a solid choice, I feel like. I mean, if we were talking that money was no issue, I'd probably still stick in the Ram ecosystem and maybe do maybe the Power Wagon. But again, like coming back to the fact that we're currently living full time in our Airstream and we're towing it often, I think, I would stick with the Tradesman.
Yeah.
500. That would be my choice.
Yeah, that Cummins is special for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm too predictable. You go.
Okay. I would pick the Tradesman and I'd send it to AEV.
I would pick the Tradesman and send it to AEV. Okay, here's the deal. What I want is I want the Ram truck, but I want the Cummins motor to put out the same amount of power that the 6.7 Power Stroke from Ford does with the 10-speed.
Yeah,
which I know is
that'd be amazing.
Which
I'm sure is coming.
Has to be coming.
Yeah.
So like I really think for me that, there was rumors that it was going to happen. There's rumors that there was going to be, an upgraded Cummins motor, that basically the high output motor was going to become the standard engine, which they have kind of done before. So that's a playbook.
Sure.
It's already done. Engineering's done. And they're going to put an Allison behind it. And that would be chef's kiss.
These poor manufacturers right now, they cannot get the chips.
Change anything.
They can't get the chips.
It's not just the chips. It's everything that's sitting off the, offshore right now.
Totally.
So
they can't. They don't dare.
I mean, it kills us at Max Tracks. It's like we have so much stuff on the water and we don't know if it'll show up in 6 weeks or 6 months.
Yep.
Like how do you prepare for that?
Sure.
And then how do you forecast for that? And how do you...
Especially for a world that has been tuned towards global commerce.
Yeah.
Where Max Tracks are made in Australia and they're shipped to the United States.
But I only have one part. I have like some colors to it. But imagine a car company that has...
Insane.
100,000 different components.
It's insane.
That go into one thing. It'll be interesting. I think that the Ram is just going to continue to get better, especially with the direction that we've seen that company go in. The people that they've brought on, the people that are doing their interiors are just like super top notch. I have the TRX right now. That's the newer style cab. That's why people call it the Gen 4.5 Ram HD, because it kind of took the 1500 cab, which won all these awards, like the interior of it,
Sure.
and they put it in the old cab.
Got
They
it.
didn't have to retool for all the body work, and maybe it was some new fenders or something like that. Still looks really good.
But the body is not dated in my mind. I think it's one of the more handsome
But
profiles.
eventually they'll go to that Gen 5 cab is kind of what people think.
Sure.
That
The
they'll
more
do.
squared off shape.
Yeah, it's nicer, it's quieter, it's better constructed. And that, to me, that is what I'm really excited for.
That's
That'll
what
be
you're
my
waiting
next. That'll be my next.
I
truck.
got you.
And it'll replace the Gladiator and it'll replace the TRX.
Because it'll just kind of do it all. Yeah, I've been driving a full-size truck for almost a year now, and I'm kind of sold on it. Like, it just does. It's amazing that I can drive back and forth to work.
Yeah.
If I drive lightly, I can get 30 miles to the gallon.
Yeah, you've got that.
3-liter turbo diesel. I can put a camper on the back of it. I can go to Home Depot and load it full of stuff. I finally understand the full-size thing.
It works.
I mean, I don't want to mislead the listener. Like, I have so much to learn still about the full-size truck segment, but I'm finally beginning to understand the argument for it above other vehicles. So
They're not super maneuverable off-road, but if you're but they can be. That's a thing.
Mine's continue to impress me.
For the West Coast, I think it's a different argument than the East Coast, where you have all of these trees and mud and off-road.
Yeah, or
parts.
Pacific Northwest would probably be a problem.
Northwest,
Yeah.
Where we are at in the Southwest.
Or for traveling in general.
Or for traveling.
Yeah.
Baja, I could think of no other truck that I'd want to do it in. I mean, I've done it in a Land Cruiser. I've done it in Gladiator. I've done it in a full-size truck. I've done it in a bunch of different things. It just makes sense.
Yeah, there's not
And
a local down there that doesn't drive those roads with a full-size truck. Of course, in two-wheel drive.
Or like a 1984 Toyota Corolla.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Yeah. So that's our picks. Thank you all for listening. The full-size truck segment is exciting, and it continues to grow and to become more and more capable and more suited to overland travel. We would love to get some comments from all of you. What vehicle are you using? How are you using it? What are some of the attributes that you're finding to be even different from what our experience has been? You can reach me at scott.a.brady on Instagram. You can see Matt at Matt Scott at Matt Explorer. And then Matt Swartz, yours is Matt.
It's m.b.swartz.
m.b.swartz on Instagram. So if you guys want to reach out, you have additional questions or comments, things that we can add into the next segment around full sizes, we'd love to hear it. What a very cool segment. And we thank you all for listening.
And I apologize to the people of Texas for the accent. It wasn't very well done. Have a good one.
And on that bombshell, we will talk to you all next time.